Q&A, and I'd encourage everyone to use the chat box to put questions in for the panelists or for James, so that we can talk more about issues that are pertinent to absolutely everybody who's on the call. Okay, so our first question, and I think I'm going to present this to Jerome first, if that's all right, because I'd like to hear the student perspective first. Sometimes on these panels, we have one student representative and they're asked to go last, and I'm not quite sure if that's the best spot. I would prefer to put you first because I really want to make sure that we hear your perspective as a student, as an international student. So, so Jerome, from your perspective, can you tell me about the main issues associated with current international student policy in Canada, and what are the implications for Canada if these issues are not resolved? And I'll give you 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Francine. So I am an organizer at the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, and we are an organization that supports the self-organizing of migrants. So we're building migrant power by bringing together workers on farms and factories, on campuses, and in communities to create change and fight for better laws and fairness for all of us. And I lead Migrant Students United as part of this, and we are a group of current and former international students who are organizing for change. So COVID-19 has resulted, as we know, in huge loss of jobs, hours, and livelihoods for both current and former international students. So for international students currently in school, so study permit holders, at the same time that they have lost work and income, tuition fees have increased in educational institutions across Canada. For graduated international students who are on time-restricted postgraduate work permits, they are facing the same issues of loss of work and wages, and also facing massive economic stress, not only because they take care of their families, but also because the jobs that many get are in National Occupational Classification, NOC C and D levels. These NOC C and D jobs are the essential jobs that sustain our economy and our communities. But because it is low wage and deemed quote unquote low skilled, it is not counted toward permanent residency. They are all essential workers who everybody, including the Prime Minister, has come to call heroes. And yet they are excluded from basic rights and protections because it is nearly impossible for them to get permanent residency. In one of the programs, the Canadian Experience class, for example, which many migrant student workers apply under, NOC C and D jobs are not counted as Canadian work experience. So last year, we saw at Migrant Students United, we saw that postgraduate work permit holders were facing just a crisis atop a crisis. The postgraduate work permit is a time-restricted permit, and it is also a non-renewable permit, which means that migrant student workers can only get one once in their lifetime. Hundreds were coming forward with their issues, saying that their permits were expiring. COVID, the pandemic had taken time for them. They were laid off from their jobs, were not able to find ones in NOC O, A, or B that count toward PR, and that their time was expiring. Essentially, they were being punished for the pandemic. So we organized for changes, and now over 52,000 migrant student workers can apply for another work permit and have a second chance to qualify for permanent residency. But this has not resolved the key issues at hand. Since the beginning of the pandemic in mid-March last year, we have surveyed over 3,300 current and former migrant students, held more than a dozen online information sessions with thousands registered from across the country, and also conducted focus groups and polling to determine migrant student needs and priorities. So we've spoken with current and former students in each province, as well as in Northwest Territories. And we are the only national representative body of migrant student workers. And right now we're in this stage of where we are continuing to identify further priorities. The top five, which have come up, I'll quickly list them here, calls to ensure real access to permanent residency. This means making postgraduate work permits renewable, lowering the points requirement for a PR, so the CRS score, counting work that is part-time in school and in any occupation towards permanent residency, notably NOC C and D. And also the second point is around fixing rules around work. So removing time limits and industry restrictions on work for study permit holders who have this 20-hour limit cap that often leaves them in gray areas where their employers are taking advantage of them. Third call is to unite families, allowing families to travel and also ensuring permits for family members. Many right now, postgraduate work permit holders are not able to renew their spouse's open work permits because in order to do so, they need to show recent pay slips in a full-time NOC OA or B job, which right now we know is nearly impossible to find as low-wage and racialized workers, especially during a pandemic. Fourth, lower tuition and ensure full services. So this means that the federal government can work with provincial partners to ensure that migrant students pay domestic tuition and have full access to all services, including healthcare, housing, jobs, and emergency pandemic benefits. Also looks like ensuring immediate access to social insurance numbers. Many, because of processing delays, don't have access to an active SIN and therefore can't find new jobs, nor can they apply for any recovery benefits. And fifth, ensuring full and permanent immigration status for all so that everybody has equal rights and protections. So I'll just make a few closing points here. The central way in which immigration policy approaches students is that students are here in Canada to study, but many are on the study permit because it is one of the few pathways available to them to immigrate. They are not international students or so-called foreign students, but they are migrant student workers, no different from the 1.6 million other migrant and undocumented people who are in this country. There is a specific logic of integration that is at play here, and that is what is dangerous. The entire system understands itself as needing to integrate people into society. So this looks like if you worked a high wage job, if you speak English, you have better economic outcomes. This is often what is told to students, that they are quote unquote the cream of the crop, but this is only for a select few. And what this logic in effect does is say that we must accept the status quo. By the same logic, it would be akin to telling women and children and racialized people not to come because their economic outcomes are worse. So we have to do away with this logic of integration, because what it does is curate a racial and class base for Canadian society. And this logic of integration that underlies the system that, that a group of people's economic outcomes are the highest and therefore they should get access to basic rights and dignity is the wrong way to approach the question. And so right now we have what is called a multi-tiered immigration system in Canada. And what a multi-tier system does, where some have permanent residency and therefore rights to healthcare, family unity, and freedom from reprisals, and while others are temporary or without status, what this multi-tiered immigration system does is engender exploitation. And that inequality and exploitation, as we have seen in the case of the people that I organize with, current and former international students, we have seen that this inequality and exploitation has been exacerbated during COVID-19, and we are calling for changes, and I'll get into the specifics of that when we talk about our second question.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that. It's a very good start to our panel, I think, in underlying the real issues to the vulnerable group we're talking about.